Okay. Everyone hear me? Perfect. Yeah, fine. Hello, everyone. I'm Jake Wyman with the Idaho Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this session's final edition of Capital Clarity, where we discuss the Golden Age in Idaho. In President Donald Trump's inaugural speech a little over 2 months ago, he stated, "The Golden Age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and will be respected again all over the world." Ever since then, President Trump is working at lightning speed to enact his America First agenda. He's deporting illegal immigrants and slamming the border shut. He's improving the economy and bringing jobs back to the American worker. He's allowing Doge to slash waste as fast as Elon can find it. Essentially, he's making good on his promise to bring the Golden Age to America. But the big question is, has this Golden Age come to Idaho? Well, we are in luck, as our speaker today is a Trump World insider that can answer this very question. Theo Wold served as Deputy Assistant to President Trump during his first term. He was Idaho's Solicitor General and Idaho Chair for President Trump's 2024 campaign. Currently, he serves as Director of the Administrative State Project at the Claremont Institute, where he's leading the charge in bringing our unaccountable executive bureaucracy back under popular and constitutional control. Please welcome today's speaker, Theo Wold.
All right. It's good to be back in Idaho. I love this building. I really do. And for a reason that should be obvious to all of you. I was just in the Capitol with all of the sewer rats yesterday, the big Capitol. And you know, you have to go through several layers of security to get in there, right? And they basically make you take your pants off and shoes off and empty all your pockets. And they look always, it doesn't matter how many times you go through the same door. Some of these guys I know by name. And they look at you like you don't belong. What possibly could justify you coming into this building? And here, not only do you get to come in, but you get to carry while you're here. Because it's your house, right? This is your house. And that's not me scrambling for an introduction. That's actually sort of metaphorical for what I want to talk to you about today. The difference between what goes on in DC and what happens here in your Capitol building here in Boise. So it's a real honor to be invited to participate in Capital Clarity. Always wanted to do it. Love and respect the people who do this, who put this on. It's an incredibly informative tool for citizens to hold their government accountable and to understand what's happening here in your name, right? Nothing happens here that isn't done on your behalf under your authority, right? Macro thesis. What is it? What is the defining feature of our regime? Everything that is done through your consent. Your consent. All right. So, look, the Golden Age. I'm sure, I know, because you're all self-governing citizens, that lots of you know that there have been declared Golden Ages throughout history, right? We're aware of this. There was a Napoleonic Golden Age. Yeah. There was a Golden Age under a sort of minor king, when we all kind of have some idea about. George III had declared a Golden Age. There was a Golden Age under Pericles, the great Athenian statesman. And then Persia invaded, and there was this war with Sparta, and it was cut short. And then there was a Golden Age under King David and under King Solomon. And I'll save the Old Testament theology for the end. But if you notice, a through line here is when you declare a Golden Age, it's usually the advertisement for, hold on, buckle your seatbelts, things aren't going to go well thereafter. All right, famous last words, as my grandpa would say. But I'm a little bit more optimistic about this golden age. And some of you should chuckle at that line who know me. I am not known to be very optimistic. So that should either worry you or make you laugh. For those who don't know me well, the president's nickname for me was Storm Cloud. Will they actually file articles of impeachment? What do you think, Theo? Yes, sir, they're going to. Are we going to win that injunction in the District Court of Hawaii? No, sir, we're going to lose. Is that bill going to pass with support from moderate Republicans? No, sir. Always bad news. Always kind of the dark side of the weather forecast. But I'm a little bit more bullish on where we're headed right now. And to understand where we're headed, I want to talk about how we got here. Okay? How we got here and what really defines the golden age. So get into your time machine with me real quick, and we'll go back, ancient history now. There are people in this room, I see a few who might not have even been sentient at that time for various reasons. Age, drink, whatever it might have been. 2008, ancient history, right? Ancient history. It looked like Republicans would never be a governing party again. It looked like this 40-year struggle to shrink the size of government was over, that we had definitively lost. And it looked like this fall-safe position. Well, we can't win the culture. We've given up on every major institution in American life, the universities, the media, sports leagues, celebrities, even talk radio. All of it was trending against us. Our backup option were the federal courts. And then this little-known Bush lawyer, John G. Roberts, ruled that it wasn't a tax, right? Remember that? And there was this entire movement that took to the streets and said, we've got to reinvigorate meaningful constitutional governance in this country. We've got to learn the documents themselves. And we've got to educate our fellow citizens. And then we've got to get elected officials who agree with us. The Tea Party movement. Remember that? But then the Tea Party movement was undone by this little bespectacled woman out in D.C., Lois Lerner. Remember her? 15 separate audits and investigations. The C3 and C4 advocacy organizations ended in a host of arrests and the filing of all kinds of government records to prevent Tea Party activists from organizing and forming their own government. We were losing, and we lost. We lost a massive election. That was 2008. I want you to remember that. That's not ancient history, despite what I say here at the front of this piece. It's not ancient history. It was really just a moment ago. And things were bleak. They were dim for anyone who cared about liberty and the lifeblood of our country, constitutional governance. So how did we get to Marco Rubio schooling Margaret Brennan on Sunday morning? How did we get to Pete Hegseth at DOD? How did we get to J.D. Vance saying, enough with the DEI? We want a Marine Corps that's actually lethal. Right? How did we get to birthright citizenship executive order, signed, sealed, delivered, and on its way to the Supreme Court? How did we get to an executive order canceling DEI? Not just in one component, not in just one scholarship program, not just with the NCAA, but throughout any federal entity, any entity that receives federal funding. How did we get there? Right? How do we get through not just discussions about, well, we should do a gang of 8, a gang of 12, A gang of 13 for that classic formulation. Anytime they say this, you should start counting your silverware. Comprehensive immigration reform. We ain't talking about that no more. What we're talking about is enforcing our nation's sovereign interests at the borders. And we even got the military deployed to do it. How did we get here? 2008, 2025. It's a matter of years. Here's what I would say. One thing that you all know. There's one irreplaceable man. There's one irreplaceable man. And President Trump is that irreplaceable man. And that I take particular glee in. I don't instantly recognize any leftist folks here. Maybe you're here and you're hiding, or maybe I just don't know your face. I don't care to know it. But leftist academics have been saying for years, and they've actually taught generations of young American school children, that there is no such thing as the great man theory of history. Men or women don't actually have the power to alter human events. They don't. It's like a clock. It was wound a long time ago. This will explain for you, why are the most famous people on the left staffers? Why are they people like me, Susan Rice, Samantha Powers, Jake Sullivan? Why are those their stars? Because they don't believe principles, the elected figures, can actually change anything. It's the minions who pull the levers, who move the curtains. So Donald Trump is a giant battering ram, a wrecking ball on the idea that great men or women lack the power to change human events. Butler, Pennsylvania proved that thesis wrong, right? So you've got an irreplaceable man who has a once-in-a-generation singular capability of expressing great truths in a simple, accessible way to the American people. And what are those great truths? There's three that I want to share with you right now. And they should be emblazoned on your mind. You should know this. You should know this. It's kind of like your Pledge of Allegiance. They should be the things that you reflexively just can say and recite. What is America First all about? How did we invert the 2008 disaster and the ascendancy of the modern, cosmopolitan, latte-drinking, leftist elite? How did we do that? Three simple categories of significant policy change. And I would hope y'all would just shout them out, but I'll give them to you, and maybe you disagree. Immigration. That America is a nation founded by settlers, not for some theoretical people, not as an economic way station, not as some kind of transferable idea. It could be here, it could be in Papua New Guinea, it could be in Samoa. No, as a particular place for a particular people, and that our immigration policy should reflect the best interests of those people. We call them American citizens. Number one. And before Donald Trump, ain't nobody talking about that. Nobody. Number two, it's sort of it catches a couple of different things, but America's trade deals abroad should serve the economic interests of American citizens. America should make the material, the technology, the goods that American citizens need. Truly, it's a modern formulation of what Jefferson said in the Notes on Virginia. America has, as the economist David Ricardo said, a comparative advantage. We've got open land, we've got ingenuity among our people, they like to tinker, they like to test, they bring new ideas, and those things together mean we can both feed the world and we can also sell to the world. But our first priority should be to clothe, feed, and equip our own people first. So that's number two. And as I said, that sweeps in all kinds of things, right? We should have manufacturing here. And Idaho, I think rightfully, is proud of being an agricultural state. And I like to say one of the jobs I had a really nasty job in 2020. It was a really dirty job. I was on the Tiger team to make sure that the United States, you consumers, did not run out of beef when the COVID lockdowns hit. And one of the fascinating things I learned in that experience is there are all kinds of agricultural states. They love agricultural subsidies. They love internalizing the cost of replacement workers, i.e. illegal aliens, to taxpayers, but they grow nothing, they sell nothing, they offer nothing to American citizens. Their products are for Chinese consumers in Beijing or for trade deals in Central America and South America. And when the lockdowns hit, we learned firsthand that America lacks the capacity to feed itself. So the next time you hear about the great agricultural might of Idaho, ask your producers, especially the corporate conglomerates, how much do you sell here in Idaho? Or even better, Idaho has a vital, powerful dairy industry that we should be rightfully proud of. But ask them how much a gallon of milk costs here in Idaho relative to states that have no dairy industry. And it will reveal to you the power and the potency of President Trump saying trade deals should serve the interests of our people first. Okay? It's category number 2. And category number 3, you should all know this instinctively, because your sons and your grandsons, your granddaughters are not on deployment in places that end in stand. Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, Iraq. Your children are here at home, starting businesses, raising kids. The cornerstone, that third part of the stool of America First policy is foreign policy restraint and an end to the never-ending conflicts and adventurism abroad. Only Donald Trump delivered that. And we take for granted now what a sea change in American policy that truly is and was. So 3 things. Immigration. America is a nation for American citizens first. 2, American trade. The American economy should work for you. And 3, there should be some restraint in our entangling alliances, as President Washington called them. There should be some restraint in the way that we use American force and American might abroad. And we should not send our young people to die in foreign battlefields for unknown and unwinnable objectives. Now I'll add one more to this list, and then we'll get to whether or not y'all are living in a golden age here in Idaho. The 4th is, and it's buried into the folds of that first inaugural address that my former boss, Stephen Miller, wrote, and I think is a brilliant piece of rhetoric, but what President George W. Bush called one really weird speech, man. The American Carnage Address, remember that? That's the line everyone slapped on it. But tucked into the folds of that speech was sort of the 4th operating thesis that Donald Trump has nailed to the front door of the Capitol in D.C. That 4th thesis is, we ought to know what's being done in your name. The government, whether it's big or whether it's small, whether it's controlled by a deep state or whether it's controlled by Joe down the street, ought to be accountable to you, and it ought to say what it's doing. And that's the birth of Doge. Where's the money going? Social Security, love it, hate it, whatever your position on is it, where's the money and who's getting it? The State Department, do they need soft power? Do they not need soft power? Open question, where's the money going? And what's the justification for a transsexual opera in Peru? So the control and the accountability of your own government, that's the 4th part of what we call the MAGA moment that led to the Golden Age. Okay? That's how we got here. Yes, an irreplaceable man with God-given talents. but a man who was willing to venture some very unpopular ideas in the public square and persuade his fellow Americans that they had tried everything else, maybe give this perspective a chance. And now look where we are. Okay, so what does that look like in Idaho? What does it look like in Idaho? Let's start with the first one, immigration. Representative Hawkins, you're going to kill my punchline here, man. So one of the projects I'm working on right now is we like to call it for shorthand. We're building the Deportatron 3000. And it's not some kind of like fancy gizmo. It's not a robot. It's actually the integration of siloed data across 14 separate agency components, 7 different departments. Because if you think that immigration is just the work of the Department of Homeland Security, if you think it's just the work of the State Department, it's not. Okay? State Department issues visas, some of which have to be cleared and authorized by the Department of Labor, some of which have to be cleared, authorized, and then spun up by the Department of Agriculture. All of those have to go through the National Vetting Center, and then they have to be handed over to the Bureau, to the Department of Justice, to DHS for clearance, for adjudication, and then for issuance. So you look across the entirety of government, it's a massive enterprise. And to give you some numbers, there are about 176 million people who enter the United States every year. Every year. For tourism, for business travel, to go to Disney World, to do summer work as a camp counselor. And it may come as a surprise, but we don't know what happens to those people, the majority of them, when they get here. Some comply with the terms of their visa, right? A visa is basically a contract. The American people say, because, right, nothing happens without your consent. So you say to the traveler from the Philippines, yes, you can come for this conference in Anaheim. And here are the terms under which we will allow you to attend that conference. You're here for less than 90 days. You can't bring in more than $10,000 worth of currency. And while you're here, you can't work. You're not entitled to any welfare benefits. And you really can't avail yourself of our court system. Now, you all know that the practical reality of that is lots of people violate the terms of our contracts, right? So immigration depends on all of these agencies, all of these departments working together and working with the states. Because the largest source of illegal alien presence in our country, increasingly now that the border is sealed, will be people who do not honor that contract and who stay. Visa overstays. Traditionally, about 63% of the illegal alien population in the United States. How do we get them out? How do we get them to comply with the terms of the contract? Well, one of the ways is through state and local law enforcement. And I've heard this right from the president's own mouth in the last 2 weeks. We will not be able to remove the 22 million people who came in under the Biden presidency through false asylum adjudication, through the CBP-1 app, through crossing the border illegally, unless we have state and local law enforcement working with us. It's the president's expectation, I'll tell you directly, and I'm not being hyperbolic, it's the president's expectation that red state law enforcement agencies are going to be there next week, working side by side with ICE, removing illegal aliens from red states like Idaho. And because I'm known for bringing bad news, I said, I hate to tell you, but the sheriff for the largest county in Idaho says he's got deputies who perform legal work on the behalf of illegal aliens. Never you mind, they're not licensed attorneys, right? Because the left usually will file complaints here in Idaho if you try to practice law without a license. Not that I don't know anything about that. But he says, I've got deputies who have to provide legal services because they've got questions and they've got to help answer these questions about what access to process, what access to courts that these illegal aliens might have. I can't sign one of these agreements. That's the sheriff of the largest county in Idaho. And your legislature had the opportunity to say, you know what, we don't want to hear from you. Enough diddling. Enough delay. We're going to mandate that you enter into 287G agreements. To which I said, in working with a couple of your elected legislators, I said, well, let's find the Solomonic compromise here. Let's not cut the baby in half, but let's give the baby a bottle, right? Let's nurse them along. We won't mandate that you enter into an agreement because that's not how it works. ICE gets to decide if they want an agreement with a local law enforcement agency or not. Some local law enforcement agencies are just too damn small. It's more of a headache for ICE than it is an advantage to the American people. But what we can do is mandate that you try. Your obligation now is to submit an application package to ICE starting tomorrow and say, yes, X county in Idaho, we'd like to enter into a 287G agreement. ICE, you let us know if you want us. Because right now, in a red state that declares publicly for the people of this state, we're not a sanctuary jurisdiction, right? That's what they tell you. The fig leaf bill that's on the record books. We're not a sanctuary jurisdiction. But in practical application of that notional truth, only 2 counties in Idaho have 287G agreements. There are leftist states in the country who have more local law enforcement working with ICE than you have here in Idaho. So that's immigration, or at least part of it. The other part I want to tell you is I saw Governor DeSantis was here in Idaho just recently. Everyone was thrilled to have Governor DeSantis here, right? The alligator taming beast of the South, the Florida hurricane himself. And everyone likes to point to the Florida model of governance. Look at all these things they've done here. And I saw legislators getting their selfies with them, and everyone was taking pictures and saying, yeah, I'm with this guy. He's so popular. And I had to scratch my head and say, oh, that's fascinating, because it's not like Governor DeSantis is an irreplaceable man. He's not Donald Trump. The model that he did in Florida, you could copy it. You could copy and paste it. In fact, I tried. Working with Representative Hawkins, a few others, we introduced a series of bills that would have replicated some of the good policy that the state of Florida did on immigration policy. One of which is a simple one. I'll just offer this and we can move on to the second point. We hear from fiscal hawks in the legislature all the time. I don't want to get mired in social policy. It's not my hill to die on. I don't want to get mired into this whole thing about immigration, who should be here, who shouldn't be here. That's too controversial. I got to respect the interests of my employers in my district. I'm just here to make sure that Idaho is fiscally responsible, that we cut the budget, make sure we make our payments. And then you say, well, that's fascinating, sir, ma'am, on JFAC. How much money are we spending on providing health care to foreign nationals? Well, it might be too much, but they don't know. And then you say, well, that same sheriff who wants to pitch you on a bond as taxpayers to build a new prison facility in the largest county here in Idaho says, well, I got to have a bigger facility. I'm running out of space, and I've been stuck with the same facility I've had for 20 years. And then you ask the simple, basic question. I understand the state's getting bigger. We're growing by magnitudes of population. But how many foreign nationals or illegal aliens are in your jail? How many illegal aliens are arrested that the Idaho taxpayer funds to house, feed, and provide health care to in that jail? Well, what's the answer? I don't know. I don't know, because I don't keep track. And the third one, and this one's going to hit home for some of you. We hear all the time, well, we're spending more and more on education, and we've really got to deliver better stats. We've got to have better widgets in this international economy. And we need to block school choice, and we need to increase per pupil spending, and we need to make sure the teachers are happy, and we're going to create all these subsidiary programs, some of them through executive order, to ensure that we achieve those results. Okay, and then you ask again the basic question. I see your per pupil spending number, right? I see your teacher to student faculty ratio. I see your expenditure on new classroom facilities, new gymnasium facilities, all of these sunk infrastructure costs associated with public schooling. How many of your students are foreign nationals or the children of illegal aliens? How much is the Idaho taxpayer paying to fund and educate the children of other nations? And what's the answer? We don't know. We don't know. So I said, okay, we'll have an informed public policy debate in Idaho. It's a really simple issue. We'll require under the law that you start tracking this. And your elected leaders in the Idaho legislature didn't allow those bills to go forward. They don't want to know. They don't want to have an answer to the question of how much money are we spending on housing, providing health care, education, jail space, mental health space for foreign nationals, the citizens of other countries. So go back to that cornerstone of America First policy. What is it about immigration? This is our country, and the interests of our immigration policy should serve the American people first. Scorecard, Idaho, failing. Okay. On the economy here in Idaho. I'll be quick on this one because I know this is something of a hornet's nest. We like to provide taxpayer-based subsidies through something called the Idaho Chamber of Commerce. Look it up. Look it up. There's a French applesauce manufacturer who had their facility paid for, who had their land entitlements paid for, who received a tax holiday for 5 years by all of you. Parlez-vous français? I didn't know you loved France so much. And the fascinating thing about this French company is at the same time, all of your elected leaders are saying, no DEI, no DEI. Over here, this company that they just gave your money to says, we're going to fund DEI in Idaho. That's what we do in France. One of the leading sponsors of the Pride Parade, of the DEI education initiatives, is this French applesauce company that your taxpayer money gave a holiday to recruit to come here in Idaho. To recruit and do what? What you're told often is to employ Idahoans. We need it. We've got to just suffer through this. We have to suffocate ourselves to just hold our nose and tolerate their leftist French politics because they're bringing jobs. Who do you think they're hiring to make the applesauce out in Canyon County? They're not American citizens. So rather than give taxpayer-based subsidies and this sort of unadulterated intrusion into the marketplace to pick winners and losers, I say simplify the code. Make it easy to start small businesses and operate small businesses in the state of Idaho. Incubate our own people. Don't give tax subsidies to the French. Okay? Number 3, on the foreign wars. And you're saying, wow, this Theo guy doesn't know anything. Foreign war-making powers belongs in Article 2. That's a federal issue that has nothing to do with Idaho. Well, as someone who serves in the armed services now, I'll tell you, the running joke is who gets deployed first. When we have an international conflict, who goes first? The Guard. The Guard. The Guard are your everyday citizens who are supposed to be here protecting the interests of Idaho. That's the actual foundational concept of the formation of Guards in our history. Guard units are to provide assistance and protection to you here in Idaho. But instead, they're sent abroad to places like Annalbar province or Mosul. Long way away from Idaho City. So there's a simple fix for that, right? A simple fix. Piece of legislation that says before Idaho can commit its Guard forces to an overseas deployment, there should be a vote. Because remember the macro thesis? Nothing is done without your consent. And I don't remember you guys being asked whether or not you wanted Idaho women and men being deployed to Afghanistan. Nobody asked you. So there's a simple bill. It's called the Defend the Guard. Defend the Guard. Show some accountability in how this decision is made. And for some reason, the bill can't get a fair hearing here in the state of Idaho. Even though the Secretary of Defense supports it. Even though the President of the United States supports it. MAGA grade here in Idaho? Failing. And I'll offer you one last one. On accountability. Accountability. One of the great things about DC is watching people perform parlor tricks, right? Smoke and mirrors, bait and switch. My favorite, the Potomac two-step. You come to talk about one thing, you leave having agreed to something else. And there's some of that here in Boise. Because there's a Doge moment. Every American taxpayer wants to know, where is the money going? Under whose authority? For what purpose? And what do we get out of it? What are we getting for all of these expenditures? And so a classic bait and switch is to say, well, we've got that momentum. And what we could do is empower all of the educated, credentialed, sophisticated citizens of Idaho. We've got forensic accountants who live here now. We've got former investigators who moved up from Los Angeles and Seattle. They got out of there because they didn't like the wacko politics, and they came here and they said, I'd love to contribute. I could find where the money's going. And what did the Idaho legislature do? They said, we're going to do a Doge committee. A Doge committee. There's no better way to kill something than put it in a committee. But the committee wasn't of sophisticated capacity. It wasn't forensic auditors. It wasn't accountants. It wasn't investigators. Who'd they put on the committee? Legislators, who are only in Boise for 3 months. And they said, we'll take 3 from the House and a sprinkling of 3 from the Senate, and then we'll do 3 more. It could be either. And I looked at the bill and I said, oh, we have that. It's called JFAC. But a lot of your colleagues and friends, they looked at this and they said, hey, Sal, you see the news? No, what's going on, Tom? Idaho's got a Doge committee. We're going to find out how the Constitution says only 23 executive agencies or councils, and we got all these hundreds now. They're going to get to the bottom of it. Hoodwinked. Bait and switch. Boise River two-step. You came in asking for one thing, and what you got was something entirely different. And what do you lose in the meantime? On immigration, on economics, on national security, on accountability, you lose the moment. You can't go back in time. Where did we start? We started in 2008. And we thought we were done. Stick a fork in us. It's over. A few years later, we're back on top. But I'll tell you, one of the exercises we're trained to do as intelligence officers in the military is to think through not what are the pathways to success, but in keeping with the way I like to think about the world. What are the pathways to failure? How could we screw this up? What could possibly go wrong? How could we undermine what is an incredibly strong hand at the table? Man, we got all the cards. We got the irreplaceable man. We got an electoral mandate. We got a new coalition that's reflective of the working class diversity of this country. And we've got the elite institutions on the run. How could we mess this up? We could say, well, we signed a fake executive order on immigration. We're going to keep giving tax cuts and subsidies to foreign corporations that will employ foreign nationals. We're not going to have any accountability of how we deploy Idaho's young men and women abroad. And we ain't going to do any of that accountability stuff. We're just going to form a committee. That looks like the pathway to failure to me. Okay, so I'll end here. I know some people want to ask questions. Golden Age. Golden Age. As I said, I'll save the Old Testament theology for the end. All right, we're there. King David, flawed man, right? Flawed man, but anointed by God to rule. And he transcended some of his limitations. He tried his best to cultivate virtue and to converge with the moment. That special historical moment on the unfolding of man's salvation. A golden age. Until his son took over, right? And King Solomon had all the trappings of kingship, still had the moment. And if you really wanted to be sort of contemporary about it, you could parse it out. What did he do? He took the interests of foreign nations over his own. He chose lucre and wealth over his own people. He didn't cultivate virtue. There was no transparency. There was no accountability to his rule. It was obfuscation. It was smoke and mirrors. And how did it end? In defeat. Dissipation. Scattered to the winds. So, look, the session is coming to an end. And I'll make this point. It's a controversial one. And I know a lot of people say, well, that Theo Wold, he's for growing government. I'd say, look, what are the legislators here to do? To rule and govern on your behalf through your consent, right? And they'll say, I'm here to do the people's work. Well, if they're doing the people's work, they still have a lot of work to do. Maybe they shouldn't leave, but they should keep governing, because I'll tell you this moment's not coming around again. We could be in a totally different world come next year. You see it already. The last thing I'll offer to you is distraction. Micro narratives, as we call it in DC, that are made macro investigations. A signal thread that could undo a presidency. We ain't going to be in the same situation in 2026. So for the folks who say, we'll get to it next year, we'll do that bill next year. I got to get back to my business. I got to get back to my farm. I got to go do other things. I got a vacation I got to take. Disney World's calling. I got to get out of here. Well, number one, you know they're not here for you. And number two, look, if the left controlled this legislature, they'd be here till December. They would do everything they'd have to do to consolidate control and ensure their power lasts for a decade. So demand more, number one. Number two, be skeptical of what they tell you is tracking with what the president wants or is doing in DC. And number three, you got to work for a golden age. So let's get to work. Thank you.
All right. Anyone have any questions for Theo? Here, let's start with you right here.
Please explain the 14th Amendment and the significance of the phrase "under the jurisdiction thereof."
Well, I don't want to put everyone to sleep. The question was, explain the 14th Amendment and the subject to the jurisdiction thereof clause. I can't give any better account than the sponsors of the 14th Amendment gave themselves in the ratifying debates on the floor of the United States Senate. Go back and look it up. Look up Senator Bingham, who was one of the leading sponsors, and Senator Lyman Trumbull, a protege and colleague of President Lincoln's. And they explained very clearly what they thought that phrase meant. But as I've said for the last close to 10 years now, I authored the executive order on birthright citizenship. And what I said, I'll share with all of you. 2 points. Number one, we know for a fact, it's in the Constitution, that the children of foreign embassies and foreign consulates should not be extended the privilege of United States citizenship. We have a foreign consulate here in Boise. The Mexican government is very shrewd. They have 134 consulates all over this country. And they're anywhere and everywhere they can influence U.S. politics. I assure you, there are hospitals in this state that issue applications for Social Security cards and passports whenever any of those employees down the street have a child here in Idaho. The Constitution forbids that. And the state of Idaho could make that clear in its own laws and chooses not to because it's a tricky question, as I've been told. It's a tricky question. Okay, so that's an easy one, number one. Number two, what I'd also tell you is what has been designed this time is a vehicle that will get to the central question of all. We're not talking about the children of F1 student visa holders. We're not talking about folks who are in the process of segueing from an H-1B onto a green card. We're talking exclusively about the children of foreign nationals who entered your country illegally, and whether or not they are entitled to the same rights and privileges as your children. And if you think in some soft spot of misplaced generosity in your heart that they are entitled to that, I would ask you, show me on the map where your children obtain the same benefits somewhere else in the world. They don't. So stop being fools and start living by the rules that everyone else in the entire world has constructed. Okay?
So this mic is just for the stream, so please project your voice and stand up when you have questions.
Get down. Okay, I represent Moose Creek Mining District in northern Idaho. Okay, the Forest Service is working with the conservationists to make that entire North Fork into scenic and wild rivers. They claim that they're trying to help us, but they're not. Okay, I have tried going through every elected official I could come up through. How can I get the information to Trump's representative of the Department of Agriculture, excuse me, that's over the charge of the Forest Service? How can I contact with them with pages of documentation of the misrepresentation, misuse of the fund by the Forest Service, the lack of road content, and the damage to the thing, plus eliminating over 120 independent mines? They've eliminated those guys. How can I get to them?
Yeah, okay. So two things again. We'll make it general and then Idaho specific. General. So people often ask, what is it that you do, Theo? What is your job? For homework, I'd say go watch the movie Michael Clayton. Does anyone know that film? It's George Clooney. But, ignore that part. He's like the bagman for a law firm, and like, as he says at one point, when a congressman gets drunk and a general's kid gets a ticket, and like, they call me, and I fix these problems. So I got a call from a former colleague who's now very important, and she said, "What should we do about the Forest Service?" I said, "Oh, I got some thoughts on that. I got some names for you. And we have some people who want to talk to people just like you, sir." That's right. And we did that because we wanted people there who, this was one of the mistakes we made last time, was we said, "Oh, I got a guy for that job." And then they got in the job and they never answered the phone again to anybody. And so we wanted to make sure we put people in roles who would actually pick up the phone. And there's a project that's underway. I don't want to talk too much about it because we're streaming here live. There's a project underway to get the input from people just like you and the men and women that you represent, which are, as I should remind everyone here who may be under the misapprehension otherwise, mining jobs are good jobs. They pay a good wage. Families can grow and prosper off of those kinds of jobs. Okay? And that's why the left wants them gone. Right? Because they're not in an industry that they can control. So one of the things I'd say as an Idaho-specific request is all around the world, our strategic peer adversaries, even some of our friends, are investing in mining. And they're opening schools of mining to teach their young people the latest technology, the sophisticated way to obtain some of the rarest, most critical minerals and precious commodities that are central to a modern technological economy. And what did Idaho do? We shut ours down. We shut ours down. And we had a candidate a few years ago who was brave enough to say, as a part of her policy platform, one of the things I'll do if I'm governor is reopen the College of Mines. Right? So if you believe in providing good paying jobs that harness the resources that God put in this special place we call Idaho, and you want families to flourish off of government subsidies, out of the industries controlled by the left, you should support mining 100 million %.
Hey, Theo, what has been done or what can be done on issues that impact Idaho and other states for that matter, but that because they're constitutional in nature, whether it be, funding foreign corporations coming into Idaho, what can be accomplished on the federal level because of the constitutional nature of those things that override state laws that are antithetical to the Constitution. Obviously, as conservatives, we believe in states' rights, but there are limitations with states' rights when they contradict or conflict with the Constitution. That's where the Constitution, the supreme law of the land, actually supersedes that. So is there anything that is addressing some of the issues that we've been talking about on the federal level that address some of these problems that are taking place within the states?
Yeah. So the question was sort of, if there is a conflicting federal law, essentially what can a state do when the federal law is supreme? Look, and I don't have an easy answer there. It's nothing that most people want to hear, but number one of the central facets in dealing with the federal government and federal law is you actually have to elect persuasive members to your federal delegation. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Look, there's an interest in working with amenable red state attorneys general throughout the country to find test litigation that will target red state laws that are antithetical to the Constitution. And red states aren't immune from this. As many of you know, what I like to say is, look, Cecil Andrus has been dead for years. It's still his government. Go to any of the agencies and you'll meet people who can trace their lineage as a state employee to so-and-so who was hired by so-and-so who worked for Cecil Andrus. The ghost of Governor Andrus still controls this capital. So there's lots of laws on the books that were enacted when Idaho was a liberal, Democrat-dominated state. And one of the things I've been pushing for a long time is we should have a review body that goes through and starts pulling these things out, just like we would harvesting timber, right? You got a lot of dead wood. Someone's got to go in there and pull it out. You can't do that when you're only here for 3 months, but that work needs to be done. So I guess part of the answer is, look, one of the great things about an America First presidency is the expectation is that you can walk on your own and you can govern yourselves. No one in D.C. is going to come bail you out, but also no one in D.C. is going to tell you how to tie your shoes. So that's something we need to do here. And then there will be, of course, those opportunities to collaborate with Attorney General Bondi or the U.S. Attorney here, whoever it might be, to get some of these more difficult federal precedents cleared.
So we have a fair number of rhinos here in Idaho. The state is 70-30 red-blue. We have a great leader in Washington and America First policies. What do you think Idahoans can do to make an Idaho First policy in executive leadership?
You're probably designing that question so that they don't let me out of this building. Look, here's what I'd say. When I gave a version of this speech recently up north in Latah, I said, there's 3 things you got to be really careful of. And I don't mean this as disrespectful to anyone here who has gray or white hair. You've got to be cognizant of age, right? And there's a place and a time to receive wisdom from our elders. I firmly believe that. I'm a product of having been raised by my grandparents. But nobody sends my grandpa to go negotiate with the Ukrainians. Okay, there's a time and there's a place. And the momentum is with the rising generation. And I don't mean me. I mean, there's younger people than me coming up, and they already have started to call me Grandpa. Grandpa, tell us what it was like back in 2012. So one way of squandering this moment is entrusting the energy to those who lack the stamina to wield it. Okay. 2, I would say it's back to the lip service without real work, right? A good friend of mine that worked for me in the White House, he had this great line where he always said, executive orders are IOUs for change. They're not a statutory document. So don't be fooled when someone says, we signed this executive order. Or look, one of the things I found funny was when there was an executive order that was signed, even though the Idaho legislature, under the good work of Representative Hawkins, had enacted a statutory change on the subject, non-citizen voting, 10 months before. It has already been done. In fact, not only was it done, but it's on the books, but then there was an executive order, and we all took the bait. We said, oh, wow, that's great. You signed an executive order. That's fantastic. So don't let the sort of lip service replace real work. And then the third one would be, don't be distracted. Everyone gets distracted on purity tests or micro issues or like sort of like the subreddit narrative or like the, like the chat group of the chat group on Telegram. It's like, well, I don't like it because he did this, or he said the legislature should be there longer. He's a big government guy. That's the quickest way to dissipate opposition energy. Go back and study any of your great opposition movements, right? The Free Republicans under de Gaulle, the Charter 72 group under Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia. What did they do with those people? They sent them over to the communists or the Nazis, right? Because there are two types of political actors. There's energy producers and there's energy consumers. If you want real change in Idaho, you got to conduce the energy production to people who are a conduit for that, not just people who are going to dissipate and steal the energy.
So I want to look forward. If we don't extend the session, it would be great if we would. So elections are coming up in 26. Our governor is going to come up for re-election, I'm assuming. So what role could a better governor play in getting some solutions and some real answers? What you're talking about, those top three things. We have AG, we have governor, we have our legislature. We're finding out who is maybe answering to the gentleman on the second floor and to get to the bottom of who's going to really represent the people and how all that might look. Is there a solution in there?
Is there a solution? Look, if you, the people, want to be sovereign, you actually have to rule. It's pretty simple. The framers designed it that way. If you're exasperated and you're tired of what you're getting, then put your shoulder into the wheel and try to get something else. I know, and people say, well, they have too much money and they've got too much influence and they control pliant media. Look, I was a snot-nosed punk in London once, back in 2009, and I asked Senator Mel Martinez, who was a committee chair, who was a good friend of the Bush family, and I said, so you're retiring, sir? It was a Q&A, just like we're doing right now. I said, you're retiring, so you've endorsed the governor, this guy, Charlie Crist, and nobody wants Charlie Crist, and the Tea Party is not behind Charlie Crist. This guy sucks, sir, respectfully. Now, there's this guy coming up, though. His name's Marco Rubio. Why don't you support Marco Rubio? And he said, Marco Rubio ain't got no money, and he's at 4% in the polls. It'd be political suicide to support that guy. And now he's a pretty amazing Secretary of State, right? He won that race. Crushed Charlie Crist. And then Charlie Crist became a Democrat. So look, the point of that anecdote is to say, if you want something different, you actually have to do the work to produce something different. It doesn't magically happen.
Theo, thanks for coming. I'm going to ask a question near and dear to my heart, and I'd like your perspective. Why haven't conservatives, whether the ones that are in Congress, but particularly in state legislatures where they're dominant, better use the power of the purse?
It's a great question, and I think there's been some interesting leadership on JFAC here in the last, this session and the last session. And some of that work has been done by members that some folks in this room probably, maybe reflexively don't like, but they've taken sort of political slings and arrows to bring some transparency to the budgeting process and actually, do some of the hard accounting, make people actually own. But the macro sort of answer to your question is lots of Republicans are still culturally captured by the left. They believe in sort of the institutional excess that the left has designed. It's a cute thing that I say, it's still Cecil Andrus' government, but in actual practice, these are still friends of theirs in many instances. Well, I know him, and when I have a water question, he'll always pick up the phone. And I know her. When I have a question about utilities, like she'll always give me the answer that I need. And so there's a general reluctance, right, to storm the Bastille. These are not shock troops for a fiscal conservative revolution. They are generally temperate, moderate people who are used to a certain way of conducting business, and they want to keep doing that business that way because it's easy, right? There's a social network that's established, the rules are clear, and the political calculus is avoid the sharp, blunt objects that can end your career and end it quickly. And that's true here, it's true in Mississippi, it's true in Alabama. In many instances, the reddest states are the worst at actually wielding the purse and extracting some kind of significant cultural change. And you may say, like, well, what does Theo mean, cultural change? Look, when the issue happened with the sponsorship of the drag shows, sure, there were lots of international corporate conglomerates who do business in Idaho, who receive tax subsidies, who were happy to support that kind of culture, right? But what was more interesting were all the government agencies that support that kind of culture, who take taxpayer dollars and fund it through sort of these rabbit-worn pathways. And the response wasn't, we're going to audit you now, which is what has happened with Musk, right? I was just with a group of the Doge guys last Thursday. And their view wasn't, we're here to break everything. It was, man, when we started pulling on that little thread, we had no idea this is what it would lead to. And now we're going to keep pulling till we get to the end. That doesn't exist in state legislatures. Part of it's an inquisitiveness, right? Let's find out. How did this sub-agency of health and welfare come to spend this money? And I'll tell you this, for as much as there's been this great to-do about how health and welfare is now better managed, there's still no answer to that question. Who made the decision, right? Let's turn the tables, as Barbara Jordan used to say in the Nixon hearings. Who made the phone call? And who had the authorizing authority to say, spend the money this way? We still don't have the answer to that. And I would say, as a citizen and a voter in Idaho, I ain't going to vote for anybody who doesn't answer that question.
We have time for 2 more questions, so if you want to be the final question, please line up.
Okay, I don't think this is on.
It's on for the stream. You're going to have to project.
Oh, all right, there we go. My name is Jean Henscheid. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Idaho, and I would like to ask a question about advocating for people with gray hair. I've been working with living facilities, assisted living, independent living facilities, and we've been trying to get these people registered to vote. A lot of folks in these assisted living facilities just moved here, don't have family here, and they are having a heck of a time getting the kind of identification that's required to actually register to vote. 90% of these people voted for the current president, but they are not able to do so now, vote for their values, because they can't get state IDs. I've been working with Mary, who's 102 years old. She is trying to understand two-factor authentication, which is what you have to do to get the DMV to give you a state ID. The question I have for you, when you're working with seniors who are probably the backbone of the state I've lived in since my family's lived in since 1868, what do we do to help these people vote?
Yeah.
What do these, and the executive order that was signed on Tuesday, I know that's just an IOU. What do we do to help these people vote?
So 3 things. Number one, on the intergenerational residency thing, I love that point, and I know some people don't. I love it because it should be a reminder that we shouldn't be giving our land, our health care, our resources to foreign nationals. No one should be more opposed, more angry, about the theft of Idaho resources than those who claim to have been here since the 1860s. Number one. Number two, what do? Look, there's an office upstairs dedicated to this exact question. It's the Secretary of State, right? And what people often want is, this is how the rule of law works. You establish a law. It's the baseline of the operating procedure, if you would. And the operating procedure is, if you want to vote, you've got to identify who you are. That's the categorical designation, right? That's the building block. Now, there's a way to create flexibility in the categorical designation, which is, we'll allow special appointments for seniors to come in on these office hours. We'll designate staff in the Secretary of State's office to go out and visit these people. That's a Secretary of State problem. The answer shouldn't be that you change the foundational law, which says to vote, you've got to show identification. Number three, look, I can speak for many people in this room. We can solve the two-factor authentication.
I don't understand.
Right, doesn't understand. I don't either. We can solve the two-factor authentication real quick, which is one day of voting, paper ballots, and proof of U.S. citizenship to vote. No fancy technology. No fancy technology is needed. No two-factor authentication, no touch screens, no computers, no counting machines. We weren't the ones who asked for that, right? And now to hear that there's problems with people accessing their sacred right under that regime, look, let's go to one day of voting, paper ballots, and we can fix it.
Okay.
Let's do two more. We got two more.
Yeah,
Miss
okay,
Purdy,
shoot, 2 more.
we'll finish it up.
Coming over here. Thank you very much. All right. You can, sorry, you can come forward and ask this.
Thanks, Theo. You've been giving us a great speech. So first of all, to the gentleman who mentioned the Forest Service, as you well know, I'm working on that, and I hope you'll let a lot of us be involved.
Vicky's a good example of this. She's a good example. She sent me paper, we'll just call it paper, the stuff that she wanted, and it made its way to the desk of the person who needed to see it.
So thank you for that. Hopefully it'll make a huge difference in the fires this summer. And the second thing is maybe you could get the Doge brothers to look into health and welfare, and because the health districts are run on federal grants. The counties, unfortunately, are stuck with paying a huge part of the tab, but their main thing is they're run on federal grants, they come through health and welfare, and they come back to the health districts. And not a single county commissioner, probably on any single board in all 7 districts, actually asks for one single federal grant. They have grant writers within these districts, and the grant writers order the grants because for whatever reason they think they can, basically it just keeps them in business. So, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I'll say in return is I'd ask all of you to be mindful of what it will mean to provide radical transparency and accountability in your government. There was a fascinating piece in the British Financial Times last week. They went to Logan, Utah. They were either in Logan or Orem, and they were interviewing people who are all angry at Donald Trump. And of course, the leftist media, their angle was, we're in a red state, in a red district, in a red county, in a red city that overwhelmingly voted for Trump. And little did Trump know that almost everyone here works for the IRS. And they're really angry about losing their jobs. So look, if you want radical transparency, you actually want to govern yourselves, some things will change. Some things will change. And that will create some angry phone calls. A good friend of mine who I'm working with right now, his sister, they come from a very MAGA family. His sister was laid off. She was a probationary employee at the Bureau, and she got fired. And she said, hey, what the heck? I'm a big supporter of the president's. Look, there will be changes, and some of it will cut close to home. Some of it will affect large and even rural counties. But if you want to live in a different regime, stupid Siri, if you want to live in a different regime where the experts rule and the oligarchs make the decisions for you, then you can keep doing what we're doing. But if you want to live in a regime, the one that the framers constructed, where you're in charge, things will look different tomorrow. I would just say be prepared for that.
Hey, you mentioned the Signal chat earlier, and it seems to me, well, I'll ask you, it seems like this inner circle is not being honest with President Trump already by that Signal chat. And then when you have one of his, what is his national security advisor, has a direct contact to a member of the media, the Atlantic of all media outlets, is he being lied to? Because he talked about peace, but yet we're already launching bombs or missiles into Yemen that is not affecting me whatsoever.
I'm going to take the, I ain't running for anything, and you can get pissed at me. I'm going to take the easy way out here. I'll just say, you don't survive 3.5 years in Trump White House by answering those kinds of questions. So I'll say nothing to that, but I will say one thing. I communicate on Signal every day. And what Musk said is actually true, which is most of the government legacy systems are so slow, so corrupted, so out of date, that if you wanted to conduct government through your consent, but consistent with the reality of 2025, you wouldn't do it this way, right? So the framers would meet, the president would meet with his cabinet, President Washington would meet with his cabinet, they would come with paper documents, the president would have questions, and they would go back, and it would take a couple of weeks, months to get those answers. And Congress met in March, right? That's when we used to meet, because they built in travel time from the far reaches of the republic by wagon and horseback to get there. The Chinese can fire hypersonic missiles that can reach Honolulu in milliseconds now. You can't make decisions on paper products. You can't make decisions where we say, Mr. President, I don't have that information for you. I've got to go and research it, and I'll get back to you. You got to have real-time data, real-time information to fully inform the people you elected so they can make those critical decisions, especially when people's lives are at risk. So people say, oh, why was he on Signal? Oh, it's a commercial end-user app. It's a product that's not designed by the government. Okay, look, well, then the government needs to be more nimble. It needs to be quicker. And it needs to procure and build programs that work with the reality of 2025, not 1976. Okay? So we need to get with the times. That's what I would say on sort of the Signal thread. Awesome. It's been great. Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.